right, good morning. We're going to go ahead and dive into it because there's a lot to cover in Mere Christianity. And I want to make sure everybody gets to share just insights that you got from the book and any comments or questions. And C.S. Lewis is just one of the great gifts of the church historically. Just an amazing, I think he was a genius, but thank God he wasn't a prideful genius. He was a very humble man. And that's one of the things that we're going to get across from all of his writing is he was brilliant and just an amazing gifted writer and thinker, but also just his lifestyle. He's somebody that's worth emulating. Sort of like with Pilgrim's Progress, there's just so much material on Mere Christianity. So before we dive into it, I want you to go to the back page, and if you're watching on video, in the description section, you can get this outline and follow as well. But I just put a few resources, just so you know, there's other resources that are available that are just on Mere Christianity. And it's a book that a lot of people have used as a discipleship book, where you meet with a group of people and discuss the book. And one of the best ways to do that is chapter by chapter, because there's so much in each chapter. The depth with which this guy writes and the insight he has and the common sense he uses and the way he illustrates things. There's a reason this book is considered by many the greatest Christian book of the 20th century. So I wanted to point out just a few resources here on the back page. Several of these are study guides to go along with Mere Christianity. So the first one, Devin Brown. Devin Brown is an expert on Lewis, and he's got a book called, I'm just going to go by order here, Discussing Mere Christianity Bible Study Guide, exploring the history, meaning, and relevance of C.S. Lewis's greatest book. You can also get that on audiobook as well. David Harrison's book, some of you, that's the one that you read the modern English version, but some of you read just the classic. I see the classic right over there that Supan has. That's sort of the classic version of it, but there's a modernized English version that you can get as well. Then C.S. Lewis, Mere Christianity, an audiobook. Julian Rhind-Tutt does the narration. He's British. Now, interestingly, a lot of people don't know that C.S. Lewis was not British. He was Irish. Okay, he was born in Belfast. And so a lot of people, because he taught at Cambridge, he taught at Oxford, he lived most of his life in England, they assume he's British, but he was actually Irish. And but anyway, that's a really good rendition of Mere Christianity that you can listen to. And again, it should be an Irish accent, but we'll settle for a British accent. That's okay. Andrew Lazo and Mary Ann Femister wrote this book called Mere Christians, Inspiring Stories of Encounters with C.S. Lewis, and that's also available on audiobook. There's a lot of famous Christians and infamous or not so famous Christians that have come to Christ by reading Lewis. But one of the most famous would be Charles Colson. Chuck Colson believes that God used Mere Christianity to bring him to faith, and he wrote about it in his best-selling book, Born Again, which was his biography, which has sold over, I think, now 3 million copies. But he was known as the hatchet man for Nixon in the Watergate scandal. But he became a Christian as a result of Mere Christianity, and many other well-known Christians as well as not so well-known Christians as well. But God has used that book to draw a lot of people to himself. So that's just a great book that tells all these biographies of people and how they were influenced by Mere Christianity. George Marsden, this is the most recent book that I've read on Mere Christianity. This is in a series of books that are biographies on these books. And so George Marsden is considered one of the top Christian historians in America. And I know that for many years he taught at Yale University. He wrote sort of the standard biography of Jonathan Edwards, one of the best biographies on Jonathan Edwards. But he wrote a whole book on just what was taking place when Lewis wrote Mere Christianity, what was going on in England, what was going on in the world, how did World War II impact his writing, and so forth. Very interesting book. So a few things about C.S. Lewis. This is, on all the great books, we're going to talk a little bit about the authors. And this comes from Joe Carter, who's writes on the Gospel Coalition. And just a few facts about Lewis you may or may not know about. He's best known for his 7 children's books, The Chronicles of Narnia. How many of you read The Chronicles of Narnia? Okay, cool. But he wrote more than 60 books in various genres, including poetry, allegorical novels, popular theology, apologetics, educational philosophy, science fiction, children's fairy tale, retold myth, literary criticism, correspondence, and autobiography. I don't know of anybody that's written in as many genres as him, like in history. I don't know of any author that's written in all these. That's why I think he was just a genius, because it's not easy to write anyway. And one of the things that he says in his biographies is that he didn't know what he thought until he wrote about it. So if somebody asked him a question, he'd write about it, and then he can tell them what he was thinking, which is insane to me, because I've got to think about what I'm writing about and get that right first before I write it out. But he didn't know what he was thinking until he wrote it, so he had a very interesting brain. Secondly, Lewis's close friend, Owen Barfield, who was a lawyer, to whom he dedicated his book, The Allegory of Love. Lewis asked Barfield to establish a charitable trust, and a lot of people don't know about this, the Agape Fund, with his book earnings. And it's estimated that 90% of Lewis's income went to charity. As a matter of fact, Owen Barfield, this is, how would you like this have said about you? Okay, this is a guy who knew Lewis really well, and he said he was the most thoroughly converted man I ever knew. And that's what impressed me when I did the men's retreat on Lewis a few years ago. I read about 20 biographies on Lewis that year, and one of the things that stood out to me was just, he's one of the first guys I want to meet when I get to heaven. Just such a humble, godly, gentle, kind man. And brilliant, but a gentle giant in a way. Not that he was giant in physicality, but giant in the sense of when you think of C.S. Lewis, he's one of the top writers of the last 100 years. But very humble, and he lived very simply. The main jacket that he wore, because he smoked a pipe, it had burn stains on it and holes in it. and that was his favorite jacket, so he wore it all the time. But he was a guy that would rather spend money on other people than himself, and he did. Third, Lewis had a fondness for nicknames. This is sort of a weird thing, but hey, I'm weird. He and his brother Warnie called each other Small Piggy Bottom. And they would call each other SPB and Arch Piggy Bottom, APB, inspired by their childhood nurse's threat to smack their piggy bottoms. Even after Lewis's death, Warnie still referred to him as my beloved SPB. In 1917, Lewis left his studies to volunteer for the British Army. During the First World War, he was commissioned into the 3rd Battalion of the Somerset Light Infantry, and Lewis arrived at the front line on the Somme Valley in France on his 19th birthday and experienced trench warfare. On the 15th of April, 1918, he was wounded and 2 of his colleagues were killed by a British shell falling short of his target. Lewis suffered from depression and homesickness during his convalescence. By the way, he had shrapnel in his leg the rest of his life, and somewhere near his stomach as well. Number 5, Lewis was raised in a church-going family in the Church of Ireland. He became an atheist at the age of 15, though he later described his young self as being paradoxically very angry with God for not existing. Lewis' return to the Christian faith was influenced by the works of George MacDonald, especially Fantastes. That book was very influential for... Has anybody read that? Okay, it's a hard read. Yeah, it's a very hard read, but that was the book that influenced him more than anything towards becoming a Christian. And arguments from his Oxford colleague and friend J.R.R. Tolkien and G.K. Chesterton's The Everlasting Man. It's interesting that God always surrounded him providentially with Christians, even when he was an atheist. And he was impressed by these Christians' intellect. He was more impressed by the intellect of his Christian friends than the atheist professors at Oxford, which was interesting because he himself was an atheist. Number 7, although Lewis considered himself to an entirely Orthodox Anglican, his work has been extremely popular among evangelicals and Catholics. And I also learned this week, Mormons too. Mormons love him. Billy Graham, who Lewis met in 1955, said he found him to be not only intelligent and witty, but also gentle and gracious. And the late Pope John Paul II said Lewis's The Four Loves was one of his favorite books. By the way, there's a, yeah?
We're wondering back here exactly what an Anglican is.
Oh, an Anglican is somebody who's a member of the Church of England. Okay. So the Church of England it's very much like a Catholic church, but it's more Protestant. But like if we went to an Anglican church in a lot of places in England, it would feel more Catholic to us, but it would feel less Catholic to a Catholic. But again, that's sort of a long story, but basically, yes, he was a part of the Anglican church, and that's part of the reason why Catholics like him so much, is because he really focused on this aspect of mere Christianity. You know, what are the essentials that people agree on? Yeah. All right, number 8. After reading Lewis's 1940 book, The Problem of Pain, the Reverend James Welch, the BBC director of religious broadcasting, asked Lewis to give talks on the radio. And while Lewis was at Oxford during World War II, he gave a series of BBC radio talks made between 1942 and 44. The transcripts of the broadcasts originally appeared in print as 3 separate pamphlets. So the first one was The Case for Christianity, which was written in 1942, Christian Behavior in 1943, and Beyond Personality in 1944. But they were later combined into the book Mere Christianity. In the year 2000, Mere Christianity was voted best book of the 20th century by Christianity Today. And by the way, what's interesting about Lewis too is he didn't believe that his writing was going to last like even maybe a year or 2 after his death. He was that humble that he thought he was worried about his brother. And so he met with Owen Barfield to just sort of figure out what's going to go on. And there was a literature professor who became a Christian through reading Lewis's writings in Kentucky named Walter Hooper. And he met him 3 months before he died. And he ended up providentially becoming his secretary and the executor of all his writing. So all the books that have been published since Lewis died, we owe to Walter Hooper. Had Walter Hooper not showed up on the scene, nobody was going to republish any of his books. So he made it his mission in life to get his book, continue to publish his books. And so anyway, that's Walter Hooper. And you could read a lot of stuff that Hooper wrote about Lewis, but amazing thing in God's providence. And then number 9, on the 22nd of November, 1963, exactly 1 week before his 65th birthday, Lewis collapsed in his bedroom at 5:30 p.m. and died a few minutes later. He had cancer. Media coverage of his death was almost completely overshadowed by news of the assassination of President John F. Kennedy, who was killed less than an hour earlier. In 2003, Lewis was added to the list of saints commemorated on the church calendar of the Episcopal Church. The Episcopal Church is sort of the American version of the Anglican Church in England. Okay, so anyway, just a little bit about Lewis, and again, we could go on and on about Lewis. But let's go ahead and get into the book. And what I did is I put some of the quotes that I highlighted, just to be able to read and talk about. But before we do that, I'm just curious about your impressions. Who read it for the first time? Who read Mere Christianity? Okay, Amanda, what was your just impression about Mere Christianity overall?
I was particularly struck by the 4th book in it, and
okay.
It's his take on like things that we already kind of knew about Christianity, but just the way he phrased it, like talking about us learning to like emulate and behave like Christ, as a, you know, sort of a transition towards like becoming, you know, a real like son or daughter of God. Like just the way he presented that was just so very different and refreshing, and just made me think a lot.
Okay, good.
Enjoyed that.
Is it the type of book that you want to read again? You think you'll go back to again?
Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good,
I wanna
good.
read it.
Someone else, just impressions from the book.
I liked how he talked about the unspoken laws.
Uh-huh.
Just that things that we expect other people to know, kind of, but we, you know, it's just our viewpoints.
Yeah. Yeah, so he calls it natural law or the Tao, the Tao. But yeah, and that's the way he starts the book, is he's trying, you know, again, because this wasn't a book initially. They were radio addresses to England while they were at war in World War II. So bombs are dropping, people are being moved, children are moved out of London to the country. I mean, this is a very serious time in England's history. But again, what's interesting is he's trying to connect with the average Brit, and basically where's the point of contact? And what he starts is there's right and there's wrong, and we all know this all over the world. Yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing in the context of what you just said, right during the war.
Yeah.
He didn't do a feel-good,
Right.
like, okay, it's all gonna be okay, everybody, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
He got, I mean, it's almost completely apart from what was going on.
Yeah.
So it was probably well received. So my other question was, what was his relationship with Winston Churchill, who was also a great writer? He published.
Yeah, you know, I haven't come across anything that has anything between him and Churchill, and I don't have any, but not to say that that's not out there. Again, I've got 200 books on C.S. Lewis in my library, and there's probably like 5,000 books and counting on Lewis. There's Lewis societies all over the world that are cropping up. They're writing new material and giving. There's actually one here in the Bay Area. There's a C.S. Lewis Institute here in the Bay Area where hundreds of people go to hear lectures. And yeah. So, by the way, I wanted to point this out. Michelle found this. She sent me the link for this, but if you go to YouTube, C.S. Lewis Doodle, you just type that on YouTube, there's a channel where, I don't know anything about the guy that does it, but almost the whole book of Mere Christianity is done, and he does artwork. He does these doodles, and he reads passages. I'm assuming he's British. It sounds like he has a British accent. But not just on Mere Christianity, but many of Lewis's books, and he continues to add to it. But it's a really good way to get a visual for the concepts he's talking about. And I was not aware of this. Michelle turned me on to this. It's really good. And so anyway, almost all of Mere Christianity is on there in these different things. So anyway, this is a good resource. Yeah.
He was asked to be on the radio by Churchill. Just what I heard.
Well, it was this guy from the BBC. This I don't know that he gave the name here. James Welch. And again, in some of the books that I recommended, as a matter of fact, that's what I was doing when we had a little accident here. But I did want to, real quick, let me point out some of these books. Again, I stopped on McCusker. But these other books are study guides to Mere Christianity, the next 5. So there's a lot of books that are just study guides for Lewis. And so if you want to do, this would be a good thing to do with like neighbors or like people you work with. You know, people that maybe they're not believers or they might be interested, but they're not closed off. You know, like it's like, I don't want to hear anything about Christianity. Mere Christianity is a great exposure to sort of like the first step of seeing that Christianity is actually logical and it makes good sense. And again, from Lewis understanding what it's like to be an atheist, he makes a contact with the secular world, particularly with secular humanism. And that's why the book is so good. And almost anybody could read it and benefit from it. Yeah.
Prior to COVID, Rick Lopez was heading up.
Yeah.
Study we were doing in the fellowship hall.
Right.
We had a workbook.
Yeah.
As well as, that got stopped because of COVID. I was hoping that would get
Yeah.
started up again someday.
Yeah. But again, I mean, if anybody ever wants to start something like that, have at it. You know, if like you want to start up a group on Lewis, you know, again, that's discipleship. And by the way, the last book there is, I haven't read it yet, but it just came out a few months ago. The very last book is Joel Woodruff, Discipleship with C.S. Lewis, A Guide to Mere Christianity for Small Groups and Mentoring Relationships. The book is specifically geared towards discipleship and using Mere Christianity to disciple somebody. So if you want to do like a one-on-one thing with somebody or a group, again, all these books are designed, but this one specifically is designed with discipleship in mind. Okay. So anyway, a lot of good resources there. Oh, yeah, any other comments on just Mere Christianity, on just sort of the overall, this is my takeaway from Mere Christianity? Yeah, Glenn.
There are so many jewels
Mm-hmm.
in his writing. There'll be even a half a sentence says more than.
Yeah.
But I think one that I remember from a long time ago was, just because I believe the sun is coming up tomorrow doesn't mean it won't. Does that ring a bell? I mean, it's like they say, well, you just believe something.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, but you can believe the truth was the point.
Right.
That stuck with me.
Yeah.
But
Good.
that's sort of, maybe I'm phrasing it wrong. But,
Right.
but
Yeah, again, he
you
just,
can't just qualify
right.
the Christian belief as, because it's a belief,
Yeah.
or even a myth. Like he talked about mythology can
Right.
be true.
Mm-hmm.
When somebody says it's a myth, that doesn't mean it's a made-up story,
Yeah.
right?
And I think that's why Lewis is compelling, is because he's not like a Christian. Fundamentalists can be taken a lot of different ways, but a lot of people, I think a lot of people from the outside looking into Christianity think we're stupid or foolish or just dumb.
Yeah.
You know, it's like we believe these old things, these myths, you know. And what he does is he takes away that stereotype and he just says, hey, how I came to faith was through logic and reason. You know, as an atheist, you know, I'm comparing my atheism and how atheism views the world and how atheism works in the real world. And this actually is pretty compelling.
Yeah.
And he even called himself the most reluctant convert in all of England when he became a Christian, but he couldn't help but be compelled by how Christianity fit with reality better than atheism did.
Maybe you could expand on that a little bit, because, well, it wasn't him. I mean, it was God, because he wrestled with God.
Right.
He fought it. He struggled not to become,
Right.
in spite of the evidence.
Yeah.
But as I've talked to different people, you know, the thing, Scientific American, like 5 or 6 years ago, did a thing that facts don't change people's minds.
Mm-hmm.
Regardless of your education, everybody they're really locked into whatever they already think. And you can give people facts, but it's not going to have much effect. And so a person, he needed to be open. As smart as he was,
Yeah.
he had the Holy Spirit.
Well, and I think that it is a good point that both Mere Christianity, his tactic in how he presented Mere Christianity in Mere Christianity, is very similar to what Tolkien did with him. You know, his expertise was myth. That was his, you know, he was arguably the biggest expert on myth in the world. And so he said, I encourage you to read the New Testament again, and I want you to decide, is this myth, for one? And if it's not myth, what is it? And so Lewis read it with that in mind. You know, again, instead of the preconceived idea that the New Testament is myth, it's like, well, what if it's not myth? Let me look at it that way. And then as an expert in myth, he realized that this has no components of myth. And so, but what because Lewis loved myth, Tolkien said, what if the truths that are conveyed in Christianity, like the truths that are conveyed in myth, are actually true, are actually real? And that, man, that like paradigm shift for Lewis.
Just
Yeah.
the meaning of that word, myth.
Mm-hmm.
I think isn't that true that a myth, like you could say Abraham Lincoln, right?
Right.
Or some bigger than life historical figure, or events, or Joan of Arc. You know, it sounds mythical, but it happened. You know, so myth can be true, right?
Right.
It's not a word that just
Yeah.
means faith.
Yeah, and again, that's the thing that's why myths resonate with us. That's why Chronicles of Narnia resonates with us. There's an element of mythology that's in Chronicles of Narnia. However, it all points to real truth. And it points to I mean, his whole thing is to really bring out, if there was another world that Jesus came to, what would it look like? And so what he did is he used his imagination to take the reality of what Jesus did here, but if you put it in Narnia, what would it look like? And that's what's so brilliant about it, because people read it and they just think they're reading this science fiction, stuff, but it resonates with people because people want there to be an Aslan. Somebody that's powerful and yet loving. Somebody that can take care of us in the midst of a world where there's ugly, evil people like the witch, and where it's always winter. How do we get summer back? So anyway, that's the brilliance of Lewis. But again, I don't think he could have written that way had he not experienced life as an atheist, and trying to make it in this world at arguably the greatest educational institution in the world at Oxford, and then he taught at Cambridge later. But he saw that he was missing what these Christians seem to have in spades. And I want that, So, okay, well, let's get to some of the quotes from Mere Christianity. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to read a few, and any comments that you might have or questions on these. But let me just start. What I did is I put some quotes in chronological order, and I had to limit it because, again, you could almost quote the whole book. It's like there's so much stuff in here. But here are some of the quotes that stood out to me. Page 4, quarreling means trying to show that the other man is in the wrong. And there would be no sense in trying to do that unless you and he had some sort of argument as to what right and wrong are. Just as there would be no sense in saying that a footballer had committed a foul unless there was some agreement about the rules of football. And then page 4. These then are the 2 points I wanted to make. First, that human beings all over the earth have this curious idea that they ought to behave in a certain way and cannot really get rid of it. Secondly, that they do not in fact behave in that way. They know the law of nature and they break it. These two facts are the foundation of all clear thinking about ourselves and the universe we live in. So, what he's doing at the outset again is he's showing that, and what the Apostle Paul does is the Apostle Paul in Romans 2 talks about that everybody has a conscience. And before that, he says everybody knows there's a creator, and people aren't not believers because of the facts, because of what God has revealed. Why do people not believe, according to Paul, is they want to sin. I think modern people want to think that they're okay. They're not, they don't want to think about themselves as sinners, but they want to see themselves as better than others. But in order to see yourselves as better than others, you have to have some standard. So even, pagan, when I worked but taught at San Quentin for a year when I first came here, it was just really interesting to hear these guys discuss. They can't really talk about what they did and why they're there. But it was really interesting to see how, even in San Quentin, everybody I talked to saw themselves as better than the other prisoners. It's like, well, at least I'm not as bad as that guy, and it's like they're all comparing this, even in San Quentin. And a lot of these guys are there for life, and some of these guys are facing, at least when I was there were people facing the death penalty and so forth. But it's just interesting, no matter where you go in the world, this is true, that there's a natural law. Nobody likes to be lied to. I've never met anybody that, you like to be lied to? Can I tell you a few lies? Oh yeah, absolutely, please have at it. Nobody likes to be lied to. Nobody likes to have their wallet or purse stolen from them. Nobody likes their house vandalized. I mean, there's certain things that are across the board. Well, where does that come from? And for Lewis, as an atheist, he could not make any sense of morality at all unless there's a moral lawgiver that everybody agrees on. And so that's what he did, is he focused on, how do I build a bridge with the average Brit out there who's secular, like me, but as a Christian, how do I open the door to get them to think about what's the first thing I want them to think about in relationship to Christianity? And his thing was, what's the connection? Is everybody has a sense of right and wrong. Okay? So that's really good for us as we think about how do we reach people today. And I don't think that's changed. I think this argument is just as good now as it was 100 years ago. Okay? All right. He continues, again, a few more quotes. Strictly speaking, there are no such things as good and bad impulses. Think once again of a piano. I knew you would like this, Glenn. It has not got two kinds of notes on it, the right notes and the wrong ones. Every single note is right at one time and wrong at another. The moral law is not any one instinct or set of instincts. It is something which makes a kind of tune, the tune we all call goodness or right conduct, by directing the instincts. And again, his use of analogy and illustration. Again, brilliant in his logic and reasoning, but again, he always gives something in there for the truck driver who didn't go to Oxford, okay? It connects with lay people, all education, all backgrounds. It's amazing how he's able to just pull these illustrations left and right to make his points. Page 13, if no set of moral ideas were truer or better than any other, there would be no sense in preferring civilized morality to savage morality or Christian morality to Nazi morality. Again, that would be very much resonate in England during World War II. Page 31, God is the only comfort. He is also the supreme terror. Again, Aslan, a lion, powerful lion who's what does he say? He's gentle or he's kind or something, but he's not safe, But the thing we most need and the thing we most want to hide from, he is our only possible ally, and we have made ourselves his enemies. Some people talk as if meeting the gaze of absolute goodness would be fun. They need to think again. They are still only playing with religion. Goodness is either the great safety or the great danger, according to the way you react to it. And we have reacted the wrong way. And again, you notice the war analogies that he's using to connect with the people who are thinking that Germany might annihilate them at this time. Okay. Page 39. Consequently, atheism, this is a great line. Consequently, atheism turns out to be too simple. If the whole universe has no meaning, we should never have found out that it has no meaning. Just as if there were no light in the universe and therefore no creatures with eyes, we should never know it was dark. Dark would be a word without meaning. I mean, what a great picture that he gives here. And how do you argue with that? I don't even know how you argue with that. It's just a brilliant statement that's just powerful. Next statement, he goes in to talk about Satan, which again, at the time, just like here, a lot of people think, oh, give me a break. You don't really believe there's a there's demons and Satan, do you? So he talks quite a bit about this, and again, his book Screw Tape Letters is one of the great books we're going to read as well, which is on a senior demon and a younger demon writing back and forth about how to tempt us and so forth. It's a brilliant book. But anyway, it says, page 46, I know someone will ask me, do you really mean at this time of day to reintroduce our old friend the devil? Hoofs and horns and all. Well, what the time of day has to do with it, I don't know. And I'm not particular about the hooves and horns. But in other respects, my answer is yes, I do. I do not claim to know anything about his personal appearance. If anybody really wants to know him better, I would say to that person, don't worry. If you really want to, you will. Whether you'll like it when you do is another question. Okay, he continues. And again, I like his humility and the way he writes. He really is not off-putting. He draws people in that are skeptical, which is hard to, it's not an easy thing to do. Page 49, what Satan put into the heads of our remote ancestors was the idea they could be like gods, could set up on their own as if they had created themselves, be their own masters, invent some sort of happiness for themselves outside God, apart from God. And out of that hopeless attempt has come nearly all that we call in human history: money, poverty, ambition, war, prostitution, classes, empires, slavery. The long, terrible story of man trying to find something other than God which will make him happy. The reason why it can never succeed is this: God made us, invented us as a man invents an engine. A car is made to run on petrol, and it would not run properly on anything else. Okay, so you see the analogy there. If we were made by God to know him, and we're trying to get to know something else besides him, it can never satisfy, because you're not doing what you were designed to do. He says the same thing over and over again in different ways, using different analogies, just constantly. It's sort of like, it reminds you of like a boxer that just, he's not just hitting them in the face, it's in the gut, it's in the ribs, it's on the chin, it's in the head, he just, from all angles, he uses all these analogies. It's just brilliant. Okay, then he continues. Now God designed, page 50, now God designed the human machine to run on himself. He himself is the fuel our spirits were designed to burn, or the food our spirits were designed to feed on. There is no other. That is why it is just no good asking God to make us happy in our own way without bothering about religion. God cannot give us a happiness and peace apart from himself, because it is not there. There is no such thing. Okay, again, a brilliant statement. Okay, then this next one is probably the most famous and the most quoted line from the whole book. Okay, paragraph from the whole book. It's called the trilemma. And again, actually this wasn't new with him. He got this from Augustine. Okay, Augustine actually came up with this, how many years? That would be almost 1,500 years before Lewis. Okay, Augustine wrote something similar to this. But again, he popularized this more than Augustine did. But here's what he says from page 52, again, probably the most famous paragraph in the whole book. I'm trying here to prevent anyone saying the really foolish thing that people often say about him, Jesus. I'm ready to accept Jesus as a great moral teacher, but I don't accept his claim to be God. That is the one thing we must not say. A man who is merely a man and said the sort of things Jesus said would not be a great moral teacher. He would either be a lunatic, on a level with the man who says he's a poached egg, or else he would be the devil of hell. You must make your choice. Either this man was and is the Son of God, or else a madman or something worse. You can shut him up for a fool, you can spit at him and kill him as a demon, or you can fall at his feet and call him Lord and God. But let us not come up with any patronizing nonsense about his being a great human teacher. He has not left that open to us. He did not intend to. And again, in that paragraph, what he's doing is he's saying, okay, what is objectively true about Jesus? Okay? You can't say he was a good teacher. And you can't say he was a lunatic. The evidence doesn't back up either of those things. If he indeed is who he said he was, then he said he was God. And so the only option you have is either he was God or he was. What's the evidence for him being God? And the evidence to Lewis, and if we do the research, is overwhelming. It's compelling that he is God. And it also is compelling that he wasn't nuts. and again, people in modern times like... what's the guy's name? Bart Ehrman at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, is probably the most influential New Testament scholar in the world today, he wavers between whether he's an atheist or an agnostic. But basically, Ehrman adds the idea that Lewis missed, that he was a legend. But there wasn't enough time for Jesus to become a legend. Okay, when you look at anybody we would call a legend or anything that's legendary, the reality is it takes years and years. But Thessalonians and Corinthians were written within a decade of Jesus' ascension. Okay, so they're in both Thessalonians and Corinthians, we're talking about resurrection and we're talking about Jesus coming back within 10 years, and there's still hundreds of witnesses alive that knew Jesus before he was crucified. So there was no time for legend to develop. And again, if Jesus didn't rise from the dead, the easiest way to kill Christianity is throw his bones in the street. Okay? Christianity's done. But the reason it's not done is because he really rose again. So Lewis, he makes compelling arguments, uses compelling illustrations. But again, how do you come back to this? And I use this all the time. Some of the people that are the closest to me, I use this argument with. I've never had anybody have a good answer to this. Now, unfortunately, most of the time they just walk away or they change the subject. Yeah. But when I ask people, do you think that Jesus really lived? I've never had anybody say no, even atheists. They believe that the evidence is compelling that he lived. The evidence is also compelling that he was crucified. So then you just keep taking him another step. You're going, if he didn't rise again, what in the world would all the disciples, why would they all be willing to die for something that they were just denying, when he was being crucified? So in other words, don't let people get away with just hemming and hawing or leaving the subject. I really try to make people go, okay, you really got to deal with Jesus. Okay, who was he? Have you checked it out? Is it worth checking out? Absolutely. Okay, it is. Okay, so Lewis does this brilliantly. Okay, any comments on just on the trilemma? You guys have probably all heard. I read this once a year when I preach. I always insert it in a sermon, probably once a year. I could have even used it today in the sermon I'm doing today.
But that name, trilemma.
Because it's the three things. The dilemma, is which of these three is most compelling. And again, I think Lewis was right. I think these are your only really three options of who Jesus was. So if you don't believe he was God, then you have to either believe he was nuts, or he was just a flat out liar. He was deceptive. But again, if you can't read the Gospels and come to either of those conclusions.
So how does Bart Ehrman deal with that?
He doesn't. His view is it's legendary.
Okay.
Yeah.
But again, what you were saying, the incredible thing, even Polycarp, who was discipled by John and wrote and everything, the one wonderful thing about, I don't know which council it was, but when they decided what would be in the New Testament, they stuck with the most original, the most closest to the event, and then everything around it. And then the idea that people say, too, that, it was written hundreds of years later or something. Yeah. Nobody would construct that.
Well, and the beauty of the New Testament is you have Tacitus, who is a Roman historian. You have Josephus, who was a Jewish historian. These guys weren't Christians, but they wrote about Jesus as historians. So there's no way out of the fact that, you really have to just be flat out in denial and really out there to say Jesus didn't live. I mean, again, most people just don't say that. I don't know of any really solid, reputable scholar that says Jesus didn't exist. But what they do is they tend to lean towards this legend idea. But again, if you're looking at just like myth, if what myth is, and you compare that with the New Testament isn't myth. When they're saying Jesus is a legend, and they're using the definition of what we describe as a legend is, it doesn't compute with the dating and the evidence. So basically what it comes down to is their preconceived idea that miracles can happen. Since there's no God, there's nothing supernatural, and miracles don't happen. That's their premise.
Yeah.
But if that's your premise and you let that drive how you interpret the reality here without being open to the supernatural, of course, then pride kicks in and you say, well, that just can't happen. You're an idiot to believe that because people don't rise from the dead, you know. But that's not an argument. That's an opinion. For me to say people don't rise from the dead is just an opinion. It's, well, yeah, in general, people don't rise from the dead, but is there a case where somebody rose from the dead? What's the evidence for that? See, the honest person who's open is going to investigate the evidence. Okay, there's a lot more here. One of the things he talks quite a bit about, if you go to page 4, is pride. He has a really good discussion on this. And let me just sort of read some of these quotes. And this is one of the reasons why Lewis, I think, has made such an impact, is because his character and his writing, like what a difference between him and Richard Dawkins or Christopher Hitchens. Any of the, what they call the four atheists of the apocalypse, Daniel Dennett, they're all very arrogant and prideful. They come across that way, and that's the way they treat people. It's like, you're right, I'm right, you're wrong, you're an idiot, you're a fool to believe that anything to do with religion could possibly be good. And it's very arrogant, very prideful the way they come across. Lewis never came across that way. Publicly, in debate, in his writings. As a matter of fact, he was actually beaten by a lady who was an atheist in a debate. They actually believe she won the debate with Lewis. And after that, Lewis never wrote another book on apologetics. As a matter of fact, that's when he really targeted children. And a lot of people think that it's sort of like he's getting notoriety. The Oxford professors at Oxford did not like Lewis because he was so popular. His classes were the biggest classes. It was standing room only. And nobody else had that. So you'd have some guy that thinks he's smarter than Lewis, he's written more important scholarly works than Lewis, and he's looking at all these students that are flocking to Lewis. And there was an incredible jealousy that arose over Lewis. But the reality was you couldn't help but like him. And when he would debate atheists, for instance, these people couldn't say anything bad about him. They couldn't really even attack him ad hominem because he was just too likable. He was too kind. And so they really had to have good arguments because they couldn't attack him in an ad hominem way. Today, debates primarily are that way. They are ad hominem. If you watch modern day debates, especially with atheists, they tend to really attack the Christian. And their premise is you're an idiot to believe, this is a fairy tale. I can't believe you believe, as a modern 21st century person with evolution, and they assume evolution is true. They assume there's no God. They assume that there's no meaning to life. This is, we came from slime, we're going to slime, and this is it. So to believe anything else, you're an idiot. Well, that's not an argument. That's an opinion. Right? So what you have to do is you have to deal with what is the evidence for evolution and what is the evidence against evolution. And Lewis, actually, there's some recent books that have come out that show that make the argument that even though evolution was prevalent at Oxford at the time, as you could only imagine, with Charles Darwin being British, the influence on Oxford and Cambridge was astronomical in the science department especially, but also every other field. But Lewis, there's compelling evidence right now. Several of the intelligent design guys have written books showing that Lewis actually did not believe in evolution. And pretty interesting reading.
Yeah.
But anyway, Lewis really hammered on pride. And here's some of the quotes here. Page 92. In taking your life as a whole with all your innumerable choices, and your life long are slowly turning the central thing either into a heavenly creature or into a hellish creature. Either into a creature that is in harmony with God and with other creatures and with itself, or else into one that is in a state of war and hatred with God, and with its fellow creatures and with itself. To be the one kind of creature is heaven. That is, its joy and peace and knowledge and power. To be the other means madness, horror, idiocy, rage, impotence, and eternal loneliness. Each of us at each moment is progressing to the one state or the other. So he's showing how, and again, you got to remember that he's dealing with Nazis. And so what the Nazis are doing, bottom line, is that it's coming from an atheistic worldview. And so I'm better than you. It leads to pride. If man is at the center, it always leads to pride. If God is at the center, it always leads to humility. If you compare yourself with God, it's going to humble you. If you compare yourself with other men, you're going to be prideful. And this is what he brings out. Is, in other words, the character and nature of how you deal with natural law is either going to lead to pride or it's going to lead to humility. So he's developing this case throughout the book. And then here's some of the just really good statements here about pride. First of all, everyone says forgiveness is a lovely idea until they have something to forgive. Okay. Any of us who've ever had to forgive somebody, it's one of the hardest things to do, isn't it? Okay. It just is. It's one of the hardest lessons to learn. He says, pride leads to every other vice. It is the complete anti-God state of mind. Pride gets no pleasure out of having something, only out of having more of it than the next man. The Christians are right. It is pride which has been the chief cause of misery in every nation and every family since the world began. But pride always means enmity. It is enmity. And not only between man and man, but enmity to God. A proud man is always looking down on things and people, and of course, as long as you're looking down, you cannot see something that is above you. We must not think pride is something God forbids because he is offended at it, or that humility is something he demands as due his own dignity, as if God himself was proud. He is not in the least worried about his dignity. The point is, he wants you to know him, wants to give you himself, and he and you are two things out of such a kind that if you really get into any kind of touch with him, you will in fact be humble, delightedly humble, feeling the infinite relief of having for once got rid of all the silly nonsense about your own dignity, which has made you restless and unhappy all your life. If a man thinks he is not conceited, he is very conceited indeed. Okay. So anyway, he goes on. We don't have time to go through the rest of these, but I do want to read the last quote on page 6. And then we'll have a few minutes for discussion. Page 6, last quote from page 227. Nothing in you that has not died will ever be raised from the dead. Look for yourself, and you will find in the long run only hatred, loneliness, despair, rage, ruin, and decay. But look for Christ, and you will find him, and with him, everything else thrown in. So, this is a book, again, I hope you got a lot out of, and I hope you go back to. And I I don't know how many times I've read it, but I reread it again, and I'm always finding new things, or things that I didn't remember, or that hit me, because you're in a different stage of life every time you read anything, and when you read your Bible, it's that way. You could read the same verse every day, and based on what happened to you that day, or it's going to happen to you that day, it means something different as far as the application. But with these great books, this is one of the books that we're going to go through that I hope you reread, that you read again. And I also encourage you, if you know people that aren't believers, to pray about asking them to go through this book with them and use one of these study guides. And you never know. God has used this book to bring many people to faith. Many people have become Christians. It may be the book that more people have become Christians in the last 100 years than any other book. I don't know of another book that God has used providentially in a more powerful way than Mere Christianity, especially to draw people to himself. So if you have family members or friends or neighbors or coworkers or whatever that are in the least open to Christianity, pray about maybe asking them to go through this book with you. And the nice thing is the chapters are short. So like even if you do it on your lunch break, or there's a lot of different ways you could do this. But the book sort of speaks for itself. It's like you don't really need to defend Mere Christianity. It is a great defense of the Christian faith. And by the way, there's another book that I highly recommend. I think C.S. Lewis primarily was targeting moderns. He wasn't postmodernism was sort of developing, but it didn't really have that terminology, and people were more modern. Meaning that people were secular, they bought into atheism, they bought into secularism, man is the measure of all things. But in the day we're living now, that's true, but also the problem now is people don't believe there is objective truth. He was at least dealing with people that believe there was even atheists believe in objective truth. Now, there's very few people, especially educational elites, that believe there is such a thing as truth. So if you want a modern, and this is we'll get to this book eventually, probably pretty soon, probably in the next year, we're going to read The Reason for God by Tim Keller. And what Tim Keller did is, Tim Keller's The Reason for God is, he talks about this. He said, I wrote this to be the Mere Christianity of the 21st century. Because I'm dealing with, he was a pastoring in Manhattan, and he was dealing with people who believe there's no such thing as absolute truth. So Lewis was writing to an audience that did believe in objective truth, although they were moderns. We're dealing with people who are postmodern who don't believe in objective truth. So how do we convey the gospel with them? So it is the best intro book to dealing with postmoderns I know of is The Reason for God by Tim Keller. Okay. And Tim Keller loved Lewis. I mean, he quoted Lewis more. The line that people said that went to Redeemer Presbyterian in Manhattan is they said, Keller didn't have as much time to study this week when he started quoting Lewis a lot. He was just constantly quoting Lewis and really knew Lewis really well. All right, we only have just a few minutes for any questions or comments about Mere Christianity. So anyone, anything?
It's kind of amazing that the ideas can be applied to the postmodernist world as cleanly as they can to the modernist world.
Right. Yeah. And that's the amazing thing about this book, is it really is, it has stood the test of time as far as just the logic and the reasoning. And again, that it still can connect with postmodern people. But I think it really throws a postmodern off their edge and that's the beauty of the analogies. The analogies still make sense. And it helps somebody to see, it would be problematic to be a total relativist in every area of life, especially when you come to a red light. That's where a relativist now believes in objective truth. Because we're told, the law is you're supposed to stop on red or at a stop sign. But if you're totally relativistic, then that means we would have no laws. We would have no rules to follow.
Their first argument would be that that's a construction. the
Right. Yeah, social construction,
So
right.
it doesn't point to any
Right.
transcendent truth.
Yeah.
And so then you pick another one. Okay, well, jump off the building.
Yeah. But again, I think somebody with an open mind who's just not reading this critically and trying to point out all the flaws, and that's all we can do. I mean, it's pretty hard to reach anybody that's super prideful and arrogant. You know, usually it takes a tragedy for that person to be reached. You know, but somebody who's open and is willing to dialogue, that's the kind of person that I think can benefit from this book.